In this video, I'm going to show you how to get NES games up and running on an Xbox Series X or S using Retroarch. The NES is just an honest classic. I mean, there's really not much more to be said about it. I mean, here in North America, it basically saved the gaming market, and there's just so many amazing games that have started because of the NES that continue into this day and age. Pretty much everything under the sun can emulate NES these days, and that includes our brand new Xbox Series X and S consoles. So let's get started to play these suckers on the Xbox. To get started with NES emulation, all you need are NES games, and there are a number of ways to get NES games these days, including ripping them from your own NES Classic, dumping them from the Wii Virtual Console, the Wii U Virtual Console, or if you've bought any number of clone systems, there are ways to dump them from those as well, so you can just get a very easy NES library legally, or if you want to go to the shady parts of the net, that's an option as well. But as always, I will not be sharing any download links, as that is illegal, so just don't ask. I will delete comments asking for links. Once you have your NES games sourced, pop them onto a USB drive. And once they're copied over, take your USB drive out of your computer and put it into your Xbox. Once you put your thumb drive into your Xbox, it should pop up automatically if you've used it before. If you haven't, and this is the first time that you are using a USB drive on your Xbox, it will ask you if you want to format it as media storage or Xbox storage. Choose media, otherwise it will delete everything that you have on it. But once you have your drive in place, go ahead and boot into Retroarch. Now, just as a reminder, this is a continuation of my original Retroarch install video, so refer back to that original video for any settings that we might be using in this video, including having your video driver set to OpenGL and integer scaling activated. Once we're in Retroarch, we're free to start loading up our NES games, and to do this we can go to Load Content, scroll down to our E drive, find our NES Games folder, and just load up a game. I don't like that method. It's annoying. So instead, I'm going to show you how to make an NES Games playlist. To do this, scroll right or left with your D-pad to find the Import Content tab. From here, we're going to do a manual scan. We're going to choose our NES game folder. So for me, E drive, NES Games. System name, press right on your D-pad to go down to Nintendo and find NES. There it is. Default core. And we are going to use the Messen core because it is technically the most accurate NES emulator. Honestly, you could choose any of them. They should all work pretty much the same. But I believe that Messen and Nestopia Undead Edition are technically the best at this current point in time, so I'm just going to stick with Messen. If you have your games separated into subfolders, be sure to have Scanner cursively on. And once you're set, hit Start Scan. And once the scan is finished, there should be a nice new NES playlist over on the right if it detected your stuff properly. And there it is. And now that this playlist is made, we are free to start loading up NES games. So I'm just going to go down to a classic here and run Super Mario World. Super Mario Brothers. World is the Super Nintendo game. Awesome. And there we go, Super Mario Brothers running on an Xbox Series X. How crazy is that? And of course it's NES emulation, so it's gonna run really well. There's been no issues with any game I've tested for NES. They just all run absolutely perfectly. And they even let me show off how much I suck. So if you were hoping to get NES games up and running on the Xbox Series X or S, that's really all there is to it. Get your games on a USB drive and plug it into your Xbox and load them up. Very simple core this time. But now I'm going to go ahead and cover some of the core options that are available within Messen. So going into our quick menu, scroll down to Options, and there's a few things we can adjust in here. The first option is the NTSC filter, and this is friggin' awesome. It's basically built-in shaders for the Messen core, so you can press A on this and you can choose between composite, S-video, or even monochrome colors. And then there's also the Biscuit filters, which are basically like composite, just scaled up a little bit more. I don't really care for these three myself, but you can scroll through these and see how they affect the image. So the composite one is really neat. It actually does a good job of making this look like an old TV signal. Like, this is Really freaking cool. So for me personally, I like having this on RGB because this makes it look like my RGB modded NES. Like, it looks really good. Of course, if you just want those sharp emulated pixels, you could just leave it on off. Next is the palette options. So the NES doesn't actually have a predefined color palette. It was all determined by your TV's output. So everyone saw NES games differently back in the day. It all just, again, depended on the TV. The only type of NES games that had an actual palette were the Play Choice 10 ones. So there is a slew of different color options available, so you can go with some of the work done by Firebrand X using his method, so there's a ton of different ones that you can choose by him. Very good choices. Then you could also choose the NES Classic palette, as seen on Nintendo's own NES Classic. Just give a couple examples of these here for you. So there's Firebrand X's, the NES Classic, another one by Firebrand X. And then this Sony one is my personal favorite. It's actually what the 3DS Virtual Console made NES games look like. Pretty neat. This is what I use on my RGB modded NES, and I'm just fond of the more lively, vibrant colors. But there's a lot of different options available for you to try out, so go ahead and explore them, see what you like. The next available option is an NES system overclock. So this will let you overclock your emulated NES and remove any frame rate issues that would be present in games. So for example, if you were playing Mega Man and there's a lot of things happening on screen, it would start to slow down. But if you overclock the emulated CPU up to medium or very high, those slowdowns are removed completely. So if you have a favorite NES title and it chugs at points, mess around with this overclock and see if you can get it to stay at consistent frames. And then there's the overclock type. I just leave this on before NMI as it's recommended. I didn't really experiment with this too much. I didn't see the need to. It worked fine for me just to do it like this. Next is the region switch. This should work when it's set to auto, but if you have a game that just isn't cooperating, you can manually set a region. Our next option is overscan. So a number of NES games just have garbage data on the outsides of the screen just because it was masked by a CRT's overscan. So for example, on Super Mario Bros. 3 here, the left side of the screen has all of this just useless blue pixels that do nothing. So you can actually crop them out using the manual overscan. So there we go. We can remove those, make it look a little bit more appealing. I guess that's the word. But then you could do that with every direction just to remove any possible garbage data that might be there. And this will vary from game to game, so just set it accordingly. Our next option is aspect ratio, so by default it is set to auto. But if you'd like a little bit more fine control over your NES game's aspect ratio, you could tell it to not stretch. You can set it to an NTSC. Or 4:3. Technically, these NES games were supposed to be scaled up to 4:3 aspect ratio, so this is what I personally prefer to use. And then if you just want to have full 16:9 stretching, you could do that as well. Next, you could change how fast the turbo speed on your controller is going. So by default, B and A are A and B on your Xbox Series X controller, and then Y and X are turbo functions for those buttons. So you could change how fast they go. Or you could turn them off completely. The next option lets you shift your A, B, X, Y buttons clockwise to make it a little more comfortable to play NES games. So by default, A is assigned to B and B is assigned to A. With this option on, A is assigned to A and B is assigned to X. It's just a little bit more of a natural thumb position for you to play NES games with. Choose what works for you on that one. Next is an HD texture pack option. I have no experience running HD texture packs on NES games, but for those of you out there that do know, you could do it here. You will need to look up where those folders and files need to go, but it's an option. Next is the remove sprite limit option. So for older games, when there were too many sprites on a single line, it would cause them to start flickering. By enabling this option, it will remove the flicker. Next option is audio related. You can have it emulate stereo sound. I don't use this personally, but it's an option. And then for the rest of these options, we're going to kind of just ignore them. I'm not covering Famicom Disk System, but if you have a Famicom Disk System BIOS inserted into your Retroarch system folder, you could tell it to automatically insert disks and to fast forward on loading to make things go faster. But for the rest of these, we're just kind of going to ignore them. Now, there's one last thing I want to cover real quick before we call this video, and that is shaders. So going down to the shaders tab, you can enable them with the press of the A button. And we can begin loading a shader preset. So to do this, you do need to have shaders downloaded. So if you haven't done so, you can go back out to the main RetroArch menu. Go to Online Updater, update GLSL shaders. So once those are downloaded and extracted, you can go back into the quick menu, find the shaders tab, load shader preset, shaders GLSL. And I like to go in and use CRT Easy mode, and this looks really good, especially when combined with that NTSC Blarg filter for RGB that I already put on here earlier through the core options. So it just looks really good to me, like it's just beautiful. And once you have a shader option that you like, you can save this as a core preset. So every time you load up this core, this will be the shader that you're greeted with. And once you have your NES emulation set up how you like it, you can also save this as a core override. So that way, every time you load up the core, these are the settings that will greet you. If there are different settings you want to use for different games, you can also save those as game overrides. So that way, those particular games will get their own settings. And that's pretty much going to cover it as far as NES emulation is concerned. It's a very easy core to get set up, not a lot of settings you need to mess with, and you could just get a really beautiful NES look to all of your games as you see fit. The NES also just happens to have a crap ton of awesome games, so if you haven't ever experienced these, there's so many awesome ways to do so, and the Series X and S is just the newest device capable of doing so. But as always, if you happen to have any questions about core setup or NES emulation in general, be sure to ask me in the comment section below, and I will do my best to try to help you out. But now if you could all do me a huge favor and hit that like or dislike button, just depending on how much you like today's tutorial. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that sub button, so that way you can see when I upload more tutorials just like this one. Goes a very long way to helping out the channel, and I am just super appreciative to all of you who have helped it grow so much in such a short time. But that's really going to do it for this video, so until next time, all my wonderful internet peeps, stay awesome, and we will see you all back next video.